We'll just stand over this way. I don't think they can see us very well, but that's okay. Yes, it is. Well, we'll just stand around here and it won't see much. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the District 50A Minnesota House Election Candidate Forum. It's very nice to have you here. We've got people from Bloomington and also from Edina because, you know, the new district is about 3/4 of Edina and some of Bloomington, and then the other quarter of Edina will have a candidate forum on Monday for that one, and that's 46B. I'm Colleen Feige, the president of the League of Women Voters of Edina, and it's wonderful to see you all here, and I want to thank all of the volunteers, both from LWV Bloomington and Edina, for working this tonight, and for all of you for attending. I want to thank you for attending, and we hope that we'll be able to get you out of here so that you can go see another big event tonight if you want to. And by the way, we had this scheduled before they did, but you know, that's the way it goes. Anyway, so thank you for being here, and I want to mention that Laura Helmer, who is the president of the League of Women Voters Minnesota, is our moderator for tonight. We have question sorters and timekeepers, and if you have any questions, just write them down on the piece of paper you were given, and someone will come around, pick them up, and we'll give them to the folks that will give them to the candidates. So, and it's my pleasure to introduce the president of the Bloomington League, and that's Greene Shepard. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Did I say Colleen? Okay, so good evening. I'm Greene Shepard. I'm the president of the Bloomington League of Women Voters, and I want to welcome all of the Edina voters and also the Bloomington voters. Hope you're here this evening. I'm pleased this is the second time that we have joined forces with Edina because of redistricting, so I think we have many more years to go while we'll be joining forces. And I want to especially thank our voter services teams, both Edina and Bloomington, for the work that you've put in to arrange all of this, volunteering. There's a big force of people behind all this work that make this happen. So thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't, as a leaguer, say, do you know if you're registered? Is your registration for to vote? Is it current? Do you know what your precinct is? Do you know where to vote? So that's all I'm going to say about that. And if you need additional information about voting, we have resources for you. mnvotes.org or the league winning resource, which is vote411.org. So we have excellent resources for you. So to our audience this evening, thank you for being here and learning more about the candidates and the issues. Now more than ever, it is important to be an informed voter. I'll turn it back to Colleen.
And I forgot to thank our candidates who are running for this office. Sorry about that. Julie Greene and Owen Michaelson, thank you for doing this. And they actually were school board members together in Edina a few years ago. So it's great to have everyone here. And I'll turn it over to you, Laura. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Colleen and Corinne. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending or viewing this candidate forum. I do want to add one more piece of information about me, and that is that I do not live in this district. I am not going to be a voter for either of these two candidates. This is an opportunity tonight to hear from the candidates for the Minnesota State Representative District 50A, which, as you've heard, covers parts of Edina and Bloomington. All candidates who filed with the Minnesota Secretary of State were invited to attend tonight. Principal issues of importance to voters will be discussed tonight. We will try to cover as many issues as possible in the time we have, which is about 60 minutes. Please feel free to contact a candidate directly after the forum if your question does not get addressed tonight. Here are the rules and the format of tonight's forum. Candidates will remain seated throughout the entire forum. Each candidate will have 1 minute to make an opening statement. The first question was sent in advance to candidates, and each will have up to 2 minutes to answer that question. Then the remaining questions will have been submitted by the community, either in advance of the forum or from those in attendance tonight. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer those. If I feel a question is particularly complex and requires a longer response time, I will lengthen the response time to 2 minutes and indicate that prior to asking the question. As the forum comes to an end, each candidate will have 1 minute to make a closing statement. League volunteers will time the candidates' responses and indicate to the candidate when they have 30 seconds remaining, 15 seconds remaining, and when the candidate must stop. The moderator and volunteers from League of Women Voters Edina and League of Women Voters Bloomington ultimately determine which questions will be asked and attempt in good faith to cover the topics of interest indicated by the questions submitted from the community. Some questions may be consolidated or edited, and questions that are personal in nature, embarrassing or hostile, or unclear in intent will not be asked. All written questions become the property of League of Women Voters. Live streaming is not available for this forum, but the City of Edina, our site host, is recording the forum and will provide electronic copies to LWV Edina and LWV Bloomington, which will be made available in their entirety for community members to view. Now, introducing our candidates. Our candidates this evening are Julie Greene and Owen Michaelson. Each candidate now will have 1 minute to make their opening remarks, and please remember to speak directly into your microphone. And so we will begin with candidate Julie Greene.
Thank you. And I first want to thank the League of Women Voters for tonight's forum. I'm grateful for all the volunteer hours that go on behind the scenes to make tonight possible. It's important work, so thank you. My name is Julie Greene, and I am running to be your next state representative because I have always believed that everyone has the right to live in a world where they feel safe and free to experience joy. And I know out talking with neighbors and residents that this vision that we have for ourselves and our district and our families is all similar. This election is about us. It's about being physically safe in our homes and our schools and the freedom to make our own healthcare decisions. Financially secure in our future and safe keeping our planet, emotionally safe, taking care of our mental health, regardless of who we look like, who we love, or how old we are. I know it's a tall order, but I also believe and know it is possible, and it's going to take a lot of work, and I'm ready for it. Thank you.
Candidate Owen Michaelson.
Hi, I'm Owen Michaelson, and I am thrilled to be running for House Seat 50A in Bloomington in Edina. I'm a longtime resident of Edina, 25 years. My wife and I have 4 children. We raised them in Edina, and all 4 of them went through Edina Public Schools, and all 4 of them graduated from Edina High School. I am incredibly committed to this community. I have devoted hundreds of hours to volunteer activities around town, principally with Scouts, coaching, church, and most recently and prominently on Edina School Board. On Edina School Board, I served as the Policy Committee Chair, as one of the founders of the Legislative Action Committee, and most significantly, I was the spearhead. I was the initiative. I led on the literacy initiative, which is now one of the cornerstones of Edina Public Schools, and I'm excited by the prospect of applying that problem-solving skill in the Minnesota legislature.
Thank you. The first question was sent to you in advance. You will have 2 minutes to answer this question, and we will begin with candidate Michaelson. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me tell you what the question is. What are the most pressing priorities for the 2025 legislative session?
I think the most pressing priority for the legislature is the next generation. And foundational to the next generation is education. And foundational to education is literacy. 50% of Minnesota students are not at grade level with reading proficiency. Fortunately, we have the READ Act. The READ Act has some wrinkles, needs some extra funding, needs some implementation issues. The second is the budget. We overspent last biennium. We had an $18 billion surplus, and we spent it all. That's, on average, about $7,000 per household. In addition, we raised taxes, and we increased the state budget by 40%. We cannot sustain that. We need to bring things back into equilibrium. We need course correction on that. In addition, we countenanced almost $1 billion in fraud. That is about $400 per household. We have to clean up our ship on this one. Thirdly, I should say, public safety. We all want to live in a community that it has safe streets. We can live in our houses without fear of crime. We need to support our police. And the police are struggling right now with retention and recruitment. I think that's one of the top priorities of the legislature, to attract competent public police officers. Relatedly, we need to protect their qualified immunity. Fourth, we need to focus on sustainability. Sometimes the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We need backup power, and I'm excited to pursue the prospect of nuclear power and geothermal as alternative sources of low carbon energy.
Thank you. Candidate Greene.
Well, first, I think we need a lot more than 2 minutes to address what needs to get done at the next sessions, but I will highlight a few. First, I think we need to strengthen our public safety measures, especially when firearms are the leading cause of death for children. We all want to keep our families safe, and it's why we fight for proactive policies, working to prevent gun violence in all its forms. It encourages gun safety and responsible gun ownership, and it's what our community wants. There is not one law that can stop tragedies, but there are critical steps we can and must take now that we need to take to save lives. 2 bills that I will sign on to immediately if I am elected is laws that would require safe storage for firearms and the reporting of lost and stolen firearms. As a former school board member, I understand the impact of not fully funding public education. Public education is the bedrock of our community, and we need to support it as such. We need to make sure that each and every student can continue making strides, particularly in literacy, that I'm really proud that our state legislature passed the READ Act in order for that to happen. But we are still woefully behind. We have mandates that have been unfunded for a very long time, and what's that done is it's created a hole in our system. And our students and our teachers carry the back of those cross subsidies right on their backs. So in order to do that and to fund, then it will allow us to address mental health concerns, which is being reported out from students and families. It also helps us pioneer some really innovative thinking and personalized learning pathways for students so that we can start building up a workforce. In addition, we have a bonding bill that needs to pass. That's important infrastructure. It did not get across the finish line last session. We have an equal rights amendment that we need to get to voters, and we have a lot of environmental concerns that we need to make sure that we are funding appropriately.
Thank you. The first set of questions will be about elections and serving in the legislature. And the first question will go to candidate Greene, and it's about voter confidence. As a member of the legislature, what measures, if any, would you support to reinforce or ensure voter confidence in our elections?
I think this is a really important question for a couple of reasons. Over the last 6, 7, 8 years, voter confidence has gotten hit, and which is one of the committees that I'm interested in joining if I get elected is our elections policy and finance. I testified with that group last year and that committee to talk about making sure that funding and money that comes into local elections gets reported to the Campaign Finance Board. Currently, it does not. But things like that, there's steps we can take that help increase that voter trust and that accountability for people that are running for office. And I think voters deserve to know where money and funding comes in when supporting campaigns.
Candidate Michaelson?
I can think of 2 things, one of which is to require driver's license as proof of identity at the time of voting, and the second is to clean up our voter rolls. I think that would increase confidence in the voter pool. So those 2 answers.
Thank you. Candidate Michaelson, to you. Which committee assignments are you interested in serving on during the legislative session in 2025, and why?
Because I served on Edina School Board, I would be honored to serve on the Education Committee. I would love to be able to work on that 50% non-proficient reading rate in Minnesota. I would love to be able to work with the READ Act and implement it in a way that is equitable and uniform across the state. There's some small school districts that are having problems with it. The second committee that I'd really like to be involved in is the Energy Committee. I think that energy is at the intersection of many things with our economy and our environment. There are many creative and economical solutions that can be pursued, and I'd like to be a part of the problem solving on that.
Candidate Greene.
So there's several committees that I am very interested in. One, I would be very interested on either one of the education committees, either education policy or education finance. I think education policy, there is not a policy that is passed that doesn't have a hit on the budget, either by resource, time, or funding. So either of those committees would be really important to be on. I think with my experience as being chair of the policy committee on the school board, I did a lot of work with the Legislative Action Committee and leading advocacy efforts. So that would be one of the ones that I absolutely would want to be on. Second is also public safety, finance, and policy. I talked earlier about the importance of public safety and things that we need to do to make sure that we are moving forward with legislation that's actually keeping our families safe and what people want in our community. And then third is the climate and energy finance and policy. And that's driven from a lot of conversations I'm having at doors with voters on what's important to us, and that is protections for the environment and our climate and making sure that we are moving forward and bringing green energy, jobs, and opportunities to our state.
Thanks. Candidate Greene, the next question. How would you handle constituents that have different views from yours on a particular issue?
Well, I think that one of the things that separates me from from others that would be running, Owen, but I reach across the aisle, and Owen can attest to that. The first thing I did when I ran for school boards was actually to call up Owen and have coffee with him, because I knew that we didn't agree on a lot of the issues, and we needed to find common ground, and that's exactly what I did. And Owen and I continue to have coffee and lunch and communicate for the time that we serve together to really look for common ground. And so when I meet with constituents, I have that same attitude. I am open-minded, I listen, and if someone says to me, I'm not going to vote for you, that's okay. I say to them, I'm still going to work my butt off for you and your family to make sure that I'm representing you, and you can always reach out to me. And that happened when I was on the school board. I had many constituents reach out to me and continue to that I know did not vote for me, and I was always willing to pick up the phone.
Thanks. Candidate Michaelson?
I think Julie and I both share a quality of temperament that we are pretty convivial, and we reach across the aisle. And I did the same thing on the school board. And I believe that I need to hear as much information as I possibly can to make the best decisions that I can. And whether I might agree with somebody or not, I can learn from that person, and vice versa. The other way around, too. On the school board, I found myself speaking up on behalf of individuals who I did not even know that there was an issue. The Creek Knoll district was having trouble with noise because of the school district, because of the soccer fields behind their houses. And so I advocated for them. So I believe in listening and being open to as much input as I possibly can receive.
Thank you. The next set of questions will be in the education category. And Candidate Michaelson, the first one goes to you. Would you support legislation to provide vouchers for private or sectarian K through 12 schools? Why or why not?
I am completely in support of public education. Public education is the bulwark of our democracy and of our economy. I want to support it in every possible way. By the same token, I want to support educational freedom, and I want to be able to give Edina and Bloomington residents the opportunity to make choices for their children that might involve other school districts. So I would be supportive of ESAs, educational savings accounts, and vouchers.
Thank you. Candidate Greene?
Absolutely not. I am not in support of vouchers. And the reason is because public education is, the basis of it is that we can't turn anyone away. We treat every single student, no matter if they have disabilities, if they have an IEP, if they have any needs. That is the focus of public education. Entering into a voucher system within the state would gut our public education system, and our kids would be impacted so poorly by that. It's reckless to actually consider that.
Thank you. Candidate Greene, this question is to you first. Recently, the Minnesota Department of Education stated that more than half of Minnesota students were not proficient in math and reading. What steps do you believe the legislature can take to address this trend?
Last session, there was a lot of money that was invested in our public school system, and that is great. And I think we're making strides with the READ Act, and we are looking at ways that we can really help students catch up from the impact of COVID, which is that we're still, you talk to any teacher and we're still reeling from that. As a legislature, I would want to partner with our school boards, our school districts, and our teachers to make sure that we are providing funding that goes into the classroom. I think that's really important that we do that, and we have to do it in partnership. I think there are times when we'll pass, when there's policy that is passed, when maybe there might be a slight miss with what's actually going on in the classroom. And I think that we can do a little bit better, I think we can do a better job of connecting the dots so that we're really impacting students so that they can grow.
Candidate Michaelson?
This is one of my top issues. As I mentioned, 50% of our students are not proficient. It's actually even worse in math. This is a crisis at the first degree. One of the reasons I banged the drum on this so much when I was on the school board is if kids aren't reading by the end of third grade and they continue on like this, they're going to grow into an adulthood in which they're going to be much more likely to have chemical dependency issues, criminal justice experiences, relationship and employment problems. We have to work on this. The READ Act is a fantastic first step, and it's been implemented, and I think there's a lag. So we're going to see some turnaround, but it takes a little while. Many teachers are going to letters training and so forth, and we're going to see some benefits from this. But as I mentioned before, the implementation has got some wrinkles in it. We need to address that. I also think that in some of these situations, we need some more wraparound supports with some of the families. My wife teaches in inner city Minneapolis, and there are families that need help. So I think it's more than just the classroom.
Right, thank you. Candidate Michaelson, this next question goes to you first. What should be the legislature's role, if any, in determining school curriculum and what is taught in classrooms throughout the state?
That's an excellent question, because the state has a prerogative to set the larger educational mission of the state, and it does that with curriculum guidance that's put out every 3 to 6 years. By the same token, we need to allow for some play in the wheel, that the districts are separate, that the communities have different characters, and so we need to allow for some local interpretation of what kind of educational experience the schools should provide for their youth. So it's a combination of both.
Candidate Greene?
You know, the state sets standards for different subjects that we need to teach kids, and I think it is dangerous territory when we go into curriculum. And I say that because we need to rely on subject matter experts, right? We need to rely on the experts. I am not an expert. I was on a school board. I am not an expert in curriculum. And most legislators are not. And you're always having to look, it's important that we always look at what is going on in a specific district and those unique needs of the students. All of those things, there's so many factors, there's so many experts. We have outstanding educators in our state, and we need to listen to them. You know, and this goes down to even choosing books, which is part of curriculum. That needs to fall into the hands of the experts.
Thank you. The next question is about public safety and firearms. I think let's do a minute and a half on this one, 90 seconds. And it goes to candidate Greene first. Crime in Edina and Bloomington is very concerning. Many are concerned with gun violence in our communities. What legislation, if any, would you support to meet the need for safe communities?
As I mentioned before, firearm safety is something that I believe it has to be a top priority at our legislature. I've met with both chiefs of police, both in Bloomington and Edina, to talk about what they're doing to address crime in our cities and what supports and resources they need so that they can successfully do their jobs. One of the pieces of legislation that I would love to support and expand is in Edina, we've been doing a lot of calls that come in where we're able to send different experts out to the scene to help support our families or support people that are calling. So it's not always an automatic 911 call. They call it a soft landing. They come in a van that's unmarked so that it's not an aggressive attempt to pull people in who call 911. I didn't say that very well, but it's a great program, and that's what we need to expand, and I think we need to expand that throughout the state. I mentioned before the two pieces of legislation that I would sign on to immediately. I also think that I would introduce legislation that we would get education materials about gun safety and gun safety storage throughout our public school system. I think that should just be part of the standards that go with the safe school plans that are required every year.
Thank you. Candidate Michaelson?
I did a police ride-along about a month and a half ago, and that was an eye-opening experience, and I was so impressed with the professionalism of the officer I rode along with. I was struck with his compassion and his knowledge of the law, his discernment, and the variety of cases that he went to. He informed me that the Edina Police, like many police departments, are struggling to find qualified candidates. The pool of candidates has diminished significantly. I mentioned this earlier, that I think the legislature ought to do as much as it possibly can to attract qualified peace officers. Police are also a little bit concerned about whether they're going to be the next person going to jail because they're doing their job. So we need to preserve their qualified immunity, as I mentioned before. Julie also mentioned something that I think I'd like to reinforce, and that is, I forget the name of the officer, but a community support officer here in Edina. And the officer I rode along with was speaking so highly of that this individual, I think, has a caseload of 8 a week, and she's diffusing so many situations. So efforts like that are phenomenal. And my final comment is the police need community support, and that's not a government program. And I was proud of Edina. As the squad car was rolling around, folks were waving to him and giving him thumbs up. And the police need that kind of support.
Thank you. The next 2 questions will be on energy and climate change. And candidate Michaelson, this comes to you first. Tell us about your priorities for helping the state achieve its climate change goals.
This is a huge priority for me because I was a backpacking guide in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in northeastern New Mexico for 5 years. We have only one environment that we can preserve. And I was a cub master too, and I'm just trying to, could you rephrase the question too?
Sure.
Restate it?
Yeah, and anytime you need something repeated, please ask. It says, tell us about your priorities for helping the state achieve its climate change goals.
Okay, thank you. And so I was not straying afield with my next comment. My next comment was that I was a cub master for 8 years here in Edina. And one of the reasons I was a cub master is because scouting was green well before it was popular, decades before it was popular. I used to joke with the parents that the Cub Scout colors are blue and gold together, that's green. And we need to develop in our youth an affection and a respect for our environment, because then they're going to be more likely to pass legislation, support lifestyles that do not tax the environment.
Thank you. Candidate Greene?
The environment is a public health issue. What we consume, our clean air, and our clean water. One of the top priorities, I think, is looking at that climate action plan that we have in the state and how we're going to get there by how we're going to fund it. It is a fundamental need that if we say this is a priority in our state, we need to be able to put money into it, not pulling from other pockets of money, but money for the environment. If we say it's a priority, that's what we need to do. I was thrilled to see the extended producer responsibility bill that went through last session. So when people in our state produce materials, they need an exit plan. What are those materials you're going to do? I think expanding that to any other area is super effective as well. The other thing is, we've also seen an increase of home insurance. And that's based on climate change. And that's a crisis that is happening, and people are affected in our district on that, and that is something else that I want to look at because it marries with our climate and environmental work. Thank you.
And this is a follow-up question, and it goes to Candidate Greene first. Do we have enough renewable energy sources for all of our needs? And what role, if any, should the legislature play?
Can you repeat the question?
Do we have enough renewable energy sources for all of our needs? And what role, if any, should the legislature play?
No, I don't think we have enough renewable energy sources right now. And I think the legislature can play a role because we can create laws and funding and provide grants for money to create different opportunities and programs so that we can get there.
Candidate Michaelson?
I'm a fan of renewables. I've been unsuccessful, however, in persuading my wife to put a windmill in our backyard or solar panels on our roof. But I believe in it substantially, and one of my concerns with renewable energy is, as I mentioned in my opening, is sometimes the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. We need reliable energy that will be there for us when renewables are not around, such as perhaps geothermal, nuclear, natural gas. We need to think about low carbon alternatives for when renewables are not online. We just saw in Los Angeles this past weekend that there were rolling blackouts. Many things were disrupted. That can happen if we do not have reliable support for energy, backup support.
Thank you. The next question is on the ERA amendment, and it goes to Candidate Michaelson first. When the ERA amendment comes to the floor for a vote, how will you vote and why?
Interesting. I haven't thought about that so directly. I would need to talk more about this. My concern is a lot of the provisions in it are already covered in constitutional provisions. So I have to say I'm a little bit undecided about that.
Candidate Greene?
I will be voting yes. The Equal Rights Amendment is a way that we can ensure protections that would be explicitly guaranteed in our state constitution. It is vital that we do this. It includes reproductive rights. It includes rights for those that are often seen marginalized groups. We need to put it in our Constitution because it's a change that changes at the pillar, right? The pillar of support of how we do all future legislation. So I will be voting yes as loudly as I possibly can. I am very much in support of this.
Thank you. The next two questions are both related to healthcare. And the first one goes to Candidate Greene first. What is your stance on funding medical and public education for long COVID to prepare our medical community and the public?
This is an interesting question for me to answer. I have long COVID. And I think we need to do more work to research on the impact of what long COVID has done for people in our state and in our district. think that one of the things that is unheard of, and now, 4 years later, we know a lot more about the virus, but there's a lot of, impact of things that have been hard to put our hands around and understand. And I think for the benefit of longevity and healthy living for people, especially as we get older, we need to put investment into this. And you don't hear people talking about long COVID anymore. It was talked about a lot, and no one really talks about it. And I can tell you, in my circles, we talk about it a lot amongst each other and issues that we still have. So, thank you.
Thanks. Candidate Michaelson.
It's a tough situation to be in, to have long COVID and suffer like that, and to not have medical payments. So I think it's an urgent issue, an issue that we need to be concerned with. And where does the funding come from? I'm wondering if federal reinsurance dollars could be used for that. It's been used for, I believe, for medical conditions like that in the past. So I wonder if we have a reserve of funds for that. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. And this one goes to candidate Michaelson first, and let's do 90 seconds on this one, please. Given the U.S. Supreme Court Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, state legislatures are enacting new laws regarding women's reproductive health issues, including access to care and birth control. What measures, if any, do you think the Minnesota legislature should enact regarding women's reproductive health and abortion?
Abortion is allowed in Minnesota. Regarding abortion itself, I agree with Amy Klobuchar that there should be some restrictions in the third trimester. I agree that we should have parental notification. And if we have public funding for other services, I think we should also permit crisis pregnancy counseling. So that's what I would say.
Candidate Greene.
I'm from a family of girls. I have 3 sisters, I have 2 daughters, I have a mother and a mother-in-law, both 80, going very strong. At no point is a politician more qualified to make a decision about a woman's health than her doctor. So the right to control our bodies is a human right. So there's a full stop there for me. You know, the Minnesota PRO Act that passed in 2023 here, and it does protect reproductive options. But we know what's at stake in a national election, and that could go away like that. So, in Minnesota, here, I mentioned the ERA Act, or the ERA before, and that does put in reproductive rights to add more protections for women. The other thing that I think is an important piece of this is to talk about contraception and different IVF issues that families have. And I do support a push to insurance companies and making sure our IVF treatments are covered under insurance. Insurance shouldn't get to make the decision on what that looks like for families and whether or not you are able to even have a child or not. If the technology is there and the medicine is there, we should be pushing for that. Thank you.
Now there's a set of questions on the budget and financial priorities. I'm going to combine 2 questions, so let's have 2 minutes on the clock for this. It's about the budget and the bonding bill, so you can combine those in your answer if you'd like. Candidate Greene, it comes to you first. So the questions are, what are your priorities for the state budget, and what are your priorities for a bonding bill which did not get passed last session?
I'll start with the bonding bill. We need to get it passed. We need to get it passed sooner rather than later. You know, here in Edina, it's millions of dollars that hasn't gotten passed, and that infrastructure and capital investment hasn't been able to come back to our community. So that has to be a number 1 priority when we go back, or when hopefully I go back, or I go to the legislature. But in terms of priorities in the state budget, one of the things that I think we need to look at are the policies that we've already passed and how effective they are being, and if there's any places within there that we can look for efficiencies. It's something that as a school board member, I did constantly. I did it with policy work to make sure our intention of policy and legislation is actually being implemented the way that we intended it to without any inconsequential costs. So that's something else that I think is, and it goes along with the budget, because I can tell you a couple things that I know from an education standpoint that I would like to work on so that we can bring some more money back into the schools. In addition to that, the other piece that I think is looking at from my conversations with both police chiefs is to talk about recruitment and making sure that we have resources and we're expanding that. Public safety is a concern for people in Minnesota, and it has been. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about crime rates, whether they're up, whether they're down. You know, we are still up above where we were 6 or 7 years ago, and we have work to do there. And so supporting that, and from a budget standpoint, I think is really important to give the resource that we need to take care of each other.
Thank you. Candidate Michaelson?
Sort of a two-part answer to this. The first is that I do like the general proportion of where the monies are allocated in our state budget. I do want to prioritize education, as I've mentioned. As I've mentioned a couple times here, the READ Act needs some help. The infrastructure bill has been tarrying and projects are not being done. Yes, I agree with that. I think I'm going to take this question to a different way, and that is that I would like to look at the budget and look at ways to trim it, because it is out of line, and we expanded it way too much in the last biennium. Minnesota is an overtaxed state. We are having an exodus of people leaving because the taxes. Minnesota has the highest corporate tax in the country, 9.8. We now have a tax on investment income over $1 million of 1%. This is causing people to leave. We've had job growth. A lot of it's been coming through the public sector, and squeezing out the public sector, the private sector, by an expansion of our government is not the best solution. So I would like to look at the budget and look at a way to trim it proportionately down to a more manageable level, so we're a little bit more tax competitive with our surrounding states.
Thank you. Candidate Michaelson, this one is to you first. How will you address waste and fraud that could be discovered in state government?
That's a favorite question of mine here. We had our Feeding the Future scandal. We had the Medicaid scandal. We had the autism scandal. We've got a clean house on this. It's a waste of money, and it creates a trust issue. What is happening in our government that is not fraudulent, but maybe is wasteful? So people are not going to trust the government as much. So that needs to be addressed. Could you give me the question again? I thought I lost.
How will you address waste and fraud that could be discovered in state government?
And this is what I would do to address waste and fraud. The Office of the Legislative Auditor has found all of these scandals and these fraudulent activities. On the legislature, I would hold hearings and I would trim budgets of those agencies that are fraudulently engaged in spending public money.
Thank you. Candidate Greene?
You know, our state government is audited, and I think that there's a lot of accusations just thrown out here on the table with our state government agencies. I would continue to work on making sure that we are auditing and using a third party to do that, and to continue looking and holding, if there is anything, holding people accountable. But to say that there is widespread fraud throughout the Minnesota state government is just not true. I have not seen that. So it's an interesting question, because I do believe in accountability, And that's why we have things in place to hold our state agencies accountable. Thank you.
All right, candidates, I've got one last question before we move to closing statements, and this was on leadership and inclusion. And it goes to candidate Greene first. How would you work to ensure that the voices of all residents are included in how you govern?
Engagement is built on trust, and trust is showing up. And that's what I did when I was on the school board. I showed up. I knocked on doors continuously. I would make calls. I would reach out. You know, I don't believe that every redhead has the same opinion as the next redhead. And so I think it's really important that when we are talking about bringing in constituent voices and perspectives, that we keep our eyes open and an open mind and making sure we're just not checking boxes, but we're actually talking and listening to people. I think our constituents and our concerns here in our district should drive the work that we do down at the Capitol. And it's just part of how I do my work. And I've done that my whole life. So, thank you.
Candidate Michaelson.
My answer to that question is to mix and mingle in the community. Get all sorts of opinions, hear what people are thinking, what they're feeling, hear what they're not saying, and address those needs. On the school board, I found myself changing my opinion on a number of significant issues because of constituent input. So I conscientiously read the emails and made decisions based off of what the residents were saying. So as a state representative, you have responsibility to exercise your best judgment, but also to represent your constituencies. And there are many issues that I don't have a horse in the race, and I want to hear what your thoughts are and what are the trade-offs, and make the best possible judgment based off of that.
All right, now we'll have your closing statements, and we'll start with candidate Greene.
We want, and I want, elected officials to be responsible and to put others first and to find solutions. Our discord around politics is contentious, but it really doesn't have to be, which is why it's more important than ever that we elect people who value truth and can lead with collaboration. As your next representative, you can expect the same for me as how I served on the school board and how I have shown up as a candidate in this race. I am engaged and accessible. I believe the more voices at the table will always make for better outcomes. I am thoughtful, and I am measured in my decision-making with strong convictions. And I always keep an eye on fiscal responsibility. And I listen and I respond. It is imperative that our legislature listens to subject matter experts, like the family here in our district who shared with me that they're second-guessing having another baby because of the high rising cost of of childcare. That's not okay. We have a lot of work to do down at the state capitol. You heard similarities in service to the community from both my opponent and me. However, I think as you've also heard tonight, the values in which we approach are starkly different. The person you see here tonight is the same person that you're going to run into at the grocery store or that you're going to see down at the Capitol making a vote. Thank you so much for listening. Please reach out with any questions. My phone is always open. I would be honored to represent the people of Edina and Bloomington, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Candidate Michaelson.
Public office is a stewardship. It is a trust given by the people to their elected official. And that is a responsibility I took to heart on my 4 years on the Edina School Board. And I would be honored to carry that mantle into St. Paul and represent the interests of Bloomington and Edina. I'm a problem solver, and I'm not an ideologue. When I got onto the school board, I didn't run on the issue, but I saw that literacy was a problem. And as I mentioned before, I think it's the social justice issue of our day. That when I saw that, I advocated for multiple years, and I won my school board colleagues over, and it is now one of the cornerstones of Edina Public Schools. I would like to do that with similar issues in the state legislature. There are so many issues that are contentious and very important, and need to have a troubleshooting mind to be applied to it. I would be honored to have your vote, and I would be thrilled to represent Bloomington and Edina in the state legislature.
Thank you, candidates, for participating in this forum and for your willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for public office. Your commitment to community is appreciated. Thank you to the League of Women Voters Edina and League of Women Voters Bloomington for sponsoring this forum. Thank you to the City of Edina for opening this space to us and for recording the forum. Thank you all for attending or viewing tonight's forum. Please remember to vote by 8 p.m. Tuesday, November 5th. Early voting starts on Friday, September 20th at Edina City Hall or Bloomington City Hall for Bloomington residents. This concludes the forum for the State Representative District 50A. Good evening.